Good evening, everyone. Hello. So, interesting day. Obviously, the big news of the day is the coup, which has stopped, by the way. If you're not aware, the coup has stopped. Wagner are turning back. But we're not going to discuss that. We are going to go with plan A, which is to discuss British politics for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously, I'm not an expert on Russian politics. I'm following various things, and I'm sure I'll be able to cobble together a useful narrative for tomorrow. But I don't think it's sensible to have a free-ranging discussion when I'm not an expert. The second reason would be, as I've just alluded to, the fact the coup seems to have stopped. Wagner are going back. All very strange, all very odd, but everything's odd. So we're going to go with, I'm going to start off with actually just a little bit of fun to begin with. Now, here's the thing. So people will notice I don't do a lot of polls or anything like that, mostly because I am aware that, it's not representative of the public or anything. You see on a Twitter poll or something like that, and they'll say, oh, who are you going to vote for? As if they're the people that are going to vote in this poll are representative of the public. And so if I ever do a poll, it is always with the understanding that it's my viewers I'm polling. And I will do the odd one. I did one a while ago when I asked sort of what people's party preferences were. I'm going to do another one where I'm going to do it as a double poll to really try and get a more detailed view, actually. But some people may have seen this on Twitter. So this is the Essex branch of Reform UK, by the looks of it, at Brexit Essex. And they put a poll out, who are you going to vote for in the next general election? And you can see at this point, and I've just clipped this today, nearly 200,000 votes. So a lot of votes. And you can see here, hardly anything for Reform UK stroke Reclaim. But their options were Reform UK stroke Reclaim, at the moment 2.6%, Conservative 2.1%, Labour, Lib Dem or Green 87.1%. You can see, you can tell they're not really interested in Wales and Scotland. And then Other 8.2%. But if you look on the left, this is the way they went with it, because this is not what they expected. They were hoping for something to feed they expected it just to bounce around their echo chamber. And it said, first of all, thank you, Britain Bites Back, for sharing this. I'm assuming they're affiliated with Reform UK. We have the usual sad trolls as well, but they are helping to promote us. So they're delighted that people who are not on their wavelength are sharing this now. Then, a little later on the day, it says, if you would all refrain from sharing this now, please, thanks. Or you don't want it being shared, which, of course, just encourages more people to share it. And then, yesterday, anyone apart from the great unwashed, which I think means us, please do vote, especially Conservative voters. So now they're telling people who should vote. They've put an option for, like, Labour, Lib Dem, Green as, like, one thing. And they're saying, can anyone apart from those people now vote? And I thought it would have been deleted by now. It's still there. It's still got a date. It's almost like they're not going to delete it. Or they're hoping for a miracle. I have to say, there's already 200,000 votes on it. It's not going to turn around in one more day. And the thing is as well, like, this is a classic case of, I looked at the account, first thing I looked at and thought, because usually it is odd, early on you expect it to reflect your echo chamber, then maybe some others share it around and it goes the other way, right? They've only got a few hundred followers. What sort of idiot puts out a divisive poll when you've only got a few hundred followers? Inevitably, you're going to get loads of people who are not part of your echo chamber filling it in. What an absolute tool. But anyway, that's our poke fun at the idiots for a moment. I'm going to go back up, actually, before I start going to some other things, because there was a good question at the start. Right, so Matthew says, thoughts on Philip Hammond. So that's the Chancellor, quite a lot of Chancellors ago now, if we're honest. That was Theresa May's Chancellor, a Remainer. Thoughts on Philip Hammond saying that to reduce inflation, we must increase immigration to suppress wage demands. Is he correct? So first of all, David has then said, inflation is caused by profiteering, not increased wages. Indeed. So the situation at the moment is incomes, even in the private sector, are on average below inflation. So that definitely cannot be inflationary. If they're below inflation, how can they be inflationary? Corporate profits are above inflation. So, which really is the inflationary income, really. So that is certainly a good point. But in terms of Philip Hammond sort of talking about this, so obviously we know the government are not going to tax corporate profits more, right? So in terms of conservative thinking, will increasing immigration to suppress wage demands reduce inflation? So I would argue Philip Hammond's got it the wrong way round in a way. Increasing immigration would in some ways reduce inflation, but not by suppressing wages, but by boosting productivity. That's what I would say here, because what a lot of people, economists have been quite free about this. Economists across the political spectrum, I'm not saying absolutely every economist, but across the political spectrum, economists are making the point that we have supply side inflation. That means not enough of the things we're used to. It's not too much demand. It's not people suddenly. There was a little bit of that when we came out of pandemic measures. A lot of people hadn't had much opportunity to spend, so they'd saved a bit up, and then as soon as restrictions were lifted, people started to go out more and stuff. More money was flooding into the economy, couldn't really cope. That created a little bit of inflation there. But ultimately what we have at the moment is not people consuming, it's debatable whether it's consuming excessively, but people are not consuming above what has been historically the case. There just isn't enough of things. So if you can boost productivity, if you can boost our production, then that will reduce inflation. So I would say that is the way to look at it. If we increase immigration, we can fill vacancies, we can boost production, so then we've got more supply. That will bring some prices down. Especially, like food inflation, although it's come down a little bit, it's still very high. And yet we've got farmers saying we can totally produce more food. We don't have the workers. And more to that point, they think they can get, because it should be harder to get the workers, shouldn't it? Because even if we allowed visas quite freely, you're still asking people from the EU to come over here needing a visa when they could just go somewhere else. But farmers reckon they could get the staff if they had the visas available to them. So, yes. Right, a couple of comments on the old inflation thing before I go on to some other topics. We're told inflation has been a long-term problem for the UK. I would say some quite radical policy is needed, but as we saw with Truss, it seems a risky route. I fear we're stuck in this loop. Yes, I would agree with that. Obviously, we don't want Liz Truss's brand of radical. Yes, I believe that a radical shake-up of the way we run our economy would be needed. But you're right. The problem would be if there were this radical shake-up, investor confidence would drop, and you'd end up in Liz Truss territory anyway. It's like it's all right moaning at governments. We are beholden to the market. It's like you can't make the changes too quickly. We are beholden to the markets. If the markets lose confidence, then the people lose confidence in the government, because what happens? If nothing else, their pension pot disappears up their arsehole. The financial markets have us over a barrel. A government can only move slowly to reduce our dependence on it, not really quickly. Yeah, we are sort of stuck. We are stuck, I think, to an extent. What are my thoughts on the effects of quantitative easing from 2020 and before on current economic situation? Don't really understand the macroeconomics enough, but surely it had an effect. Inevitably, of course, it had an effect. But I think part of the reason why the effect was larger than it needed to be is because there was the quantitative easing, which is basically printing lots more money. But then the Bank of England went through a process end of last year of reversing it unnecessarily. Or, I'm not an economist, in the view of some economists, unnecessarily. I'm just going to turn my fan on, actually, it's getting really warm. So when, for example, the government are blaming the Bank of England for certain missteps, it's not unreasonable. The Bank of England have made some missteps, this is true, although it is still cheeky of the government when the government have been sort of promoting what they've been doing. It's not like the government have gone, oh, we're not sure about that, but, we'll leave you to it. The government have supported them every step of the way. So they don't really get to turn around and go, oh, well, it's clearly their fault. Rishi's done himself over too much now, surely. Yes, absolutely. Let's have a little look before I go to more comments. Sorry, let's just have a little look at the. I'm going to go through the Tory problems. My Tory problems slide. So, above my head is Lee Anderson on his new GB News show. This is the deputy chair of the party. Remember, feeding beans, baked beans. That's what's on the end of that spoon to Brendan Clark Smith, a Boris Johnson cultist, right? That's where they are. Now, before I come back to this, let me show you what I was up to today. These are two photos. Now, on the bottom left, you can't even see me because I'm not kidding. There were so many people there, they couldn't get them. I was stuck at the back. I was behind there. And I'm too short to really be at the back. There were ridiculous numbers of people there. There were 100 people in that room, at least. There were a good 60 odd of us who went out canvassing afterwards as well, knocking on doors. Above that photo is the Conservatives doing the same thing. I think they went out yesterday. There may have been some doing it today. I saw this photo today. I know Greg Hans was in Selby yesterday. And this is the point I want to make. He's the only one going out. That's the Conservative Party chair. He's the only one campaigning. And this was happening in the local elections as well. Rishi Sunak went out campaigning. Greg Hans went out campaigning. Lee Anderson, I'm just going to switch back to this one. Lee Anderson went out campaigning at the beginning of the local election campaign, but then stopped. Went on holiday, I think, didn't he? But in terms of there's got these crucial by-elections. Today, Labour, and this wasn't the first time Labour have been knocking on doors in Selby and Aintree, but today I went along, and I have to tell you, I don't do a lot of canvassing, but I have never seen so many people. I know it's a by-election, which means you can draw people in from lots of areas, right? But I have never seen so many people. And this is just one day, 4 weeks out still. There'll be many more of them. Basically, Labour in Selby and Aintree are getting around. They're going to knock on every door. They are going to knock on every single door. And the Conservatives are not, because they can't, because they've not got the volunteers to do it. Today, there was Rachel Reeves there. There was Simon, forgotten his surname, sorry, the guy from Wakefield, who won the by-election last year. There was Diana Johnson, who's closest to me. There were several other Labour MPs as well that I'm not as familiar with. I think there must have been about 6. I think there must have been at least 6 Labour MPs there today. Who have the Tories got? They've got Greg Hans. That's it. There's no senior Tories going around campaigning. They have given up. Lee Anderson, the deputy chair of the Conservative Party, if you look at his Twitter, there's nothing about, oh, here's me campaigning in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Here's me campaigning in Somerton. Here's me campaigning in Selby. None of that. It's all about promoting his new show on GB News, which seems to take the form of feeding Tories who are incapable of feeding themselves. I mean, my goodness. Does anyone think Sunak's finished and replacing soon? They'll replace him with Keir Starmer. That's it. They can't. The Tories have got no options left. Try and consider Boris Johnson lasted a lot longer than he should because there was no one to replace him with. When Tory MPs made Boris Johnson leader, right? It was known at the time. It was correspondents were talking to MPs, and there were a lot of MPs that supported Boris Johnson but knew he would be a bad prime minister. They supported him because they believed he was the only one who could unlock the election, and in the end, they were that was right. But some of them reportedly went to Boris Johnson and went, "Look, mate, you're going to be a bad prime minister. We need you to win the election, but you're going to be a bad prime minister. What can you do to ease my fears?" And what Boris Johnson did, he says, "Oh, don't worry. I'm going to appoint a cabinet of superstars, you see, and they'll do all the work, and I will just be the front man winning new elections, right?" And that's worked for them. And then what was his cabinet of superstars? Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg, eventually like the likes of Nadine Dorries and so on. It's like, what? So you can imagine, did some of these MPs go back to Boris Johnson and say, "Boris, You told us you were going to elect a cabinet of superstars. Oh, yes, yeah. But then I realised that a cabinet of superstars might challenge my leadership. So instead, I appointed the most feckless and vacuous MPs the Conservative has to offer. And it was really just, you know. So when it came time to get rid of Boris Johnson, there was Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt. That was it. That was your choice. Penny Mordaunt, who might look relatively sane, but bear in mind she's ERG, and also bear in mind she hadn't got the confidence. She has never run a government department. David Cameron didn't ask her to run a government department. Theresa May didn't. Boris Johnson didn't. Liz Truss didn't really have time, but she didn't. And Rishi Sunak hasn't. She's been in the last two Prime Minister's cabinet, but as leader of the House, which is basically a glorified photocopy manager. Liz Truss, obviously, bananas, absolutely off her head. And Rishi Sunak comes across as, but he's out of touch, completely out of touch, doesn't have a clue what he's doing. Hasn't got, all he knows how to do is gamble other people's money. That's it. That's how he made his money, gambled other people's money. Because that's how these sort of bankers work. They gamble other people's money, and when it pays off, they pocket the profit. And when it doesn't pay off, they force the governments to bail them out, so they still get their winnings. They cannot lose. So, of course, they take reckless gambles because, well, it's Barings Bank and all that, but it's very difficult for them to lose, shall we say, because the government almost always has to bail them out if they get it wrong, and they still get their money then. Oh dear. What's my thoughts on the Guardian article saying that Labour won't distance from Peter Mandelson after recent documents were in court by JP Morgan saying he was close to Epstein after being jailed? So I have a long... So you'll never have seen me, by the way, posting pictures on Twitter of certain figures stood with Jimmy Savile or Epstein or anyone else, or Robert Mugabe or anyone like that, right? My attitude is I don't do guilt by association. So that is my personal view on that. What I would say is it obviously, if I were the Labour leader, I would judge how it might look, and Starmer's obviously taken the view it doesn't look bad at all. My personal view is I never, ever, ever attack anyone because of who they may be associated with, because I don't think that's fair. I don't necessarily blame people who might be a bit would go, well, surely did you know what he was like? Well, I don't know, maybe not, but I judge people on their own actions, not always the company they keep. There are certain exceptions, like for example when you've got BBC journalists who frequently go to Conservative parties, you know, like social events, and they never go to Labour ones. It's like, well, are you really? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, well, I'm just socialising with them. That's how we break down barriers to interview them. It's okay. So why do you never go to Labour socials or Lib Dem socials or Green Party socials then? Well, if it's only ever... So something like that you can say, if you're only ever seen at socials involving Conservatives, then as a journalist, are you really someone we can consider objective? But generally speaking, I don't believe in guilt by association. Right, going back to Tilly's comment there. Will polling now get back to trust levels with ridiculous poll leads unless the Tories get economy under control? It's already very close to it. Where's the polling? It's pretty close to it. So YouGov now have Labour on a 25-point lead. Now, what I would point out here, and as I keep saying, and you can see it from the graph, you can see it yourself, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. So, you know, people go mad, they'll see a poll and something's either up or down, and they go, oh, it's because of this, or it's because of this event. And it's usually not. It's because they've asked different people. They've tried to profile, of course they have, but at the end of the day, it's different people. You can have two people that, as far as YouGov are concerned, have the same voting profile, but one of them will say, at the moment, if they're swing voters, yeah, I like Labour, I would vote Labour if they went to the polls tomorrow. And the other one wouldn't. So you do get up and down. But what I would say is, in the last week, I mean, that's a big big jump up for Labour and a big drop for the Conservatives, but we've seen that across all polls. All of the polls have been showing a sizable gap between Labour and the Conservatives. Now, it won't, again, it will narrow again. It's because the Conservatives have had a complete nightmare over the last couple of weeks, tying themselves in knots over Boris Johnson. There'll come a period of calm and it'll narrow again. But what I would say is, when it does narrow, it tends to narrow to like about 15 at best for the Tories, and then something happens and it widens again. It's not like, consider it wasn't very long ago that Conservatives, it's only like a month or so ago that Conservatives were trying to look at the polls and go, oh, it's showing a clear trajectory towards sometime next year overtaking Labour. And you looked at it and you went, no, it's not. You're just going through a little period of narrowing, and it'll go the other way because something will happen, because something will always happen. At the moment, so there was the energy crisis last year. The Tories thought they'd get away with that because the energy prices will come back down again, which they should do, but they can control that. But then there's the mortgage crisis. Well, actually, the government can't do a lot about that, really. They've created the problem, but there's not really a lot they can do about it. What can they do? I mean, you could argue the government are pretty much doing what they can do. They are, well, what they should be doing is boosting productivity, like I say. But in terms of what they're doing in isolation about the mortgage crisis, given that they support the Bank of England's moves to higher interest rates, what can you do? You know, if they think they need the higher interest rates, your options are limited. So that's a huge problem for them. They can delay the pain, but the pain is still coming. You know, the COVID inquiry is still going on. You know, just massive, huge problems. And what happens when he does bring inflation down, or when inflation comes down completely apart? Because he hasn't got a plan. James Cleverly's just been made to look ridiculous because a journalist was asking him on the BBC, apparently, what is Rishi Sunak's plan for it? And James Cleverly started to try and talk about this, that, and the other. And said, no, that's the interest rate. That's the Bank of England. What is Rishi Sunak doing about it? Oh, he's doing this. Oh, there's short, medium, and long-term things to do. Yes, okay. So what's he doing in the short term? Oh, nothing. You know, so it was completely exposed that Rishi Sunak isn't actually doing anything. He's just hoping inflation comes down so he can take the credit. But what if it does? There's a disturbing number of people who think if inflation comes down, prices come down. No, prices go up. Just not as much as they did before, but they still go up. And you come back to the Philip Hammond comment. And remember, he's a moderate. He's a moderate. He's a raging lefty as far as the current Conservatives are concerned. And he's saying bringing more immigration to suppress wages. So the way to bring inflation down is to suppress wages. And this is the double thing, isn't it? They're trying to, and the way the Conservatives are trying to suppress wages, by the way, is not with immigration, but by crushing public sector pay. There's been some pay agreements that the Conservatives are thinking about going back on now, because they are convinced that if they keep crushing public sector pay, that private sector pay will also fall down. And the interest rates thing, it's all about taking money off us. This, you know, Brexit was supposed to be this high wage economy, the vehicle to the high wage economy rather. And now they're basically saying, the Bank of England and the government are both saying, we need to reduce wages in real terms. That's what they're saying. We want you to earn less money. That is what they're saying to the country, to every salaried worker. Half the time, spouses are the last to know about infidelity. Why would an acquaintance know more? I mean, sometimes you could always say, probably you should have known, maybe you shouldn't, or I don't know. But like, as I say, I never, if you want to attack someone for something they've done or said, yeah, but not something someone else did or said that they happen to be friends with. You can be friends with dickheads. Plenty of people are friends with dickheads. You know, because they got to be friends with them for a while when they weren't dickheads, and then they became a dickhead later on. But they're your friend. You don't just abandon them because they're a dickhead. Phil, why do you only go to Tory functions? When do I go to a Tory function? I'm allowed to be biased. I'm not a journalist. Oh, and Simon there saying the Mandelson photo, context, everything. He may have just been told to stand next to him. Yeah, possibly. I see. I've not looked into it because I'm not really that bothered. At the end of the day, if Labour are getting advice from people who give them good advice, fine. How do I know they're getting good advice? They're doing well in the polls. As long as that carries on. If at some point they don't look like winning the next election, whenever it happens to be, then I will look more carefully at who they're getting their advice from. Like, there was a time when I'd have been quite happy for Owen Jones to give advice to Jeremy Corbyn because, you know, he seems to, well, he does. He's, you know, he's not an idiot and he's not politically naive. He's electorally naive. That's what transpired. So he shouldn't have been informing policy or even just strategy. But, you know, to begin with, you would have thought, fair enough, give him a go. But he was absolutely bloody awful, that's it. So he proved himself useless. You know, you give people a chance. Am I sure there'll be a quiet time for the Tories? It's been nothing but chaos for 2 years. There's always little respites. You know, over summer, for example, you know, there'll be a period of calm, and not necessarily over the whole of summer, but there will be little periods of calm before the next shitstorm hits. But there will always be another shitstorm. You know, we've still got, I mean, look at what we've got imminently. At some point, quite soon, we're supposed to be having this judicial review into whether the COVID inquiry can demand those documents from the government. Now, if a judge says, yes, you should have access to these documents, well, the shit's going to hit the fan again, isn't it? So there's always another mess just around the corner for Rishi Sunak. He's completely buggered it. And I want, actually, before I come back to comments, I want to just, so this were the YouGov polls, but there was a feature in the Times on it, I think yesterday. May have been in today's paper, but I think I read it yesterday online. And I want to read this bit out because this is really, I thought, this was the couple of paragraphs that caught my eye. It says, the poll was conducted between Tuesday and Wednesday this week, meaning last week, before the announcement of the rise in core inflation and the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates to their highest level in 15 years. So this polling was before that fateful day when the economic news was so dire that every economist in the country was going, Sunak's buggered it, that's it, done, finished, forget it. Forget about the election, you've knackered it. This polling was before that. What would it have been like after it? That's what you have to wonder. Then the second paragraph here says, the polling also, and this doesn't surprise me in the slightest, this is consistent with the way these polls go all the time. The polling also found very little public support for demands by Conservative MPs to cut taxes, something many backbenchers believe to be essential if Sunak's got any chance of winning the next election. Asked to choose between reducing taxes and spending more on the NHS and other public services, only 33% of current Conservative supporters back tax cuts. So remember, we're not talking about the public. Conservative supporters, Conservative voters, only a third of them want tax cuts. So you've got backbenchers. You've got backbenchers who are saying, "Oh, we need to appeal to the public with tax cut." That's always their answer. How can we appeal to the public? Tax cuts. That's the way. Tax cuts. A third of them don't want the tax cuts. Only a third of them want the tax cuts. The rest want better public services. The rest have, like, if you offer them a Tory voter tax cuts, great, under normal circumstances, but they want the public services because they recognise that if you save them 50 quid a month in tax, but you're costing them 100 quid a month on having to get these unavailable public services privately, you're not saving them money. They understand that. People are not that thick. So, you know, usually where the Tories win is by saying that they will give them the public services and the lower taxes. But when it comes to it, even Conservative voters will choose the public services. We are not America. Our politics sometimes looks like America, but we are not America. You know, in this country, even most Conservative voters value universally accessible public services. Right, let's go to some more comments. Polls like this could well mean the Tories call it quits and call a snap election. If sensible Rishi can't save the party, no one can. It may do the opposite, though. it may have them thinking, if we're going to be buggered anyway, why not string it out for another year? Because remember what the Conservatives are actually empowered to do: asset strip. So they can think to themselves, we'll nick a load more money, right? It's another year to nick money, and another year to implement legislation to salt the earth for Labour. They will act out of spite. I did a video today on just such a piece of legislation, purely out of spite. There's no reason for it. It serves no good purpose at all. At all. It's there out of spite. It's there to create a problem for Labour. Do they repeal it, in which case they waste parliamentary time when they should be doing other things? Or do they leave it there, in which case you've got this carbuncle on our statute books? So you could see it go the other way. But the point I keep trying to make is there's a very real... In fact, it's almost certainly the case that the longer the Tories now delay, the worse it gets for them. So do they wait another year just to cause maximum damage for the Labour government, but lose an extra 50 to 100 seats? Or do they go earlier to retain some reasonable number of seats? But it's not even necessarily that choice, though, because they may think to themselves, things might get better. If you imagine it, you're a Tory MP, right? You're a Tory MP. You obviously don't want Labour to come to power. There's never going to be a point where you think maybe we just need Labour in power now. That's never going to happen. And you're worried about your own seat. Would you not, even if you're normally fairly intelligent, even down-to-earth people in real need, your brain basically lies to you. Like, all of us have got memories of when we were young of things that didn't happen, because your brain lies to you all the time, especially when you're having to come up with a quick decision, because the part of your brain that's good at decisions is very slow. But there's another part of your brain that will quite happily come up with a very quick decision, but in order for you not to be worried about it, it like calms you down. It says, we've gone through all this. It's sound. The decision is sound. Don't you worry about it. So your brain, you've actually got a part of your brain that lies to you. There's a Boris Johnson in your head. And, you can imagine these Tory MPs, even normally down to earth, under the pressure of the impossible situation they find themselves in, just thinking to themselves, well, maybe something will turn up. Maybe it'll ease next year. And that'll be their copium. And they might delay it foolishly just because they don't want to go into... Tories do not like losing elections. They really hate it. Absolutely despise it. Tax cuts and functional social services is a bit of an oxymoron. Yeah, but the Tories convince people it can be done. And how? Oh, efficiencies. They make out that there's like money just being funneled away. Well, actually, ironically, under the Tories there often is. But, as if under Labour there's like money just being funneled away. And yeah, there is some waste, and there's some times when they spend it on things they probably shouldn't. I've talked often about when I was a teacher. I was a young teacher under Labour. I saw investment coming in. The money came rolling in. Wasn't always spent in the best way. I keep saying interactive whiteboards, we didn't need those. The projectors, very nice. Thank you very much. I like that. That was brilliant. The interactive whiteboards, no, I didn't use those. And neither did many teachers. It wasn't just me being a Luddite. Many teachers did not that the Luddites were anti-technology. That's actually unfair. I know some teachers that have used them. I know hardly any. That was a waste of money. But at the same time, you've got things like that, sure, but if you were not spending that money on that, you'd have spent it on something better, something more useful. New schools, for a start. But anyway, they distracted the country or half the world with a submarine story that was known to have collapsed on Sunday via military hardware. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm quite sure Rishi Sunak has spent today thinking, next week's sorted because Russia is imploding. And now, I don't know what's going on there, really, I don't. But if it is all over now, this coup, then, well, that's that. It'll be in the Sundays tomorrow. Oh, what really happened? And then it'll have petered out for Monday. I feel, didn't Kinnock have a similar lead in the polls in 1992? Well, two things to say about that. First of all, no, I don't think he did when you look under the bonnet. Remember, it's not always about the poll lead. It's about, the individual breakdown, how people think they're doing on the economy, healthcare, blah, 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 blah. But the other thing is, polling was not as sophisticated as it is now. Polling has come on since then. Remember, 1992, pollsters got it wrong. So we knew that the polling in 1992 was false. They'd got it wrong. And pollsters, because they'd got it wrong, went back to the drawing board, worked out. They did exactly what you should do in life when you get things wrong, not come up with excuses. They went, right, how did we go wrong? Improve it. So polling has come along a great deal since then. There's been like at least 2 revolutions in polling since 1992. So it wouldn't, although you may find a poll in 1992 that looked like, it's like now, we know it was inaccurate. Whereas we've got confidence in these ones. That, I mean, something could be happening that's very weird, and it's wrong this time as well. But like YouGov, for example, and Ipsos Mori are the 2 I always push. I mostly look at YouGov because they do theirs with online polling. Ipsos Mori do theirs actually talking to people on the phone or face to face. So Ipsos Mori don't do them as often. YouGov do them more often. But I would say look at both of them because, there will be some types of voters YouGov don't capture and some types that Ipsos Mori don't capture. But both of them have proven themselves in the last 2 general elections. So they've both proven themselves to be pretty good. That's not to say all the others are rubbish. There's like a sliding scale. Omnissus is all right. And all the way down to like Delta Poll is absolute pants. When did interactive whiteboards become commonplace in schools? So I started teaching, I started my teacher training in 1997, started teaching in 1998. I would say within about 5 years, they were starting to become very common. So when I started teaching, it was still the old chalkboards, the old blackboards with the chalk. I used to like the chalk, loved it. It was nice. You didn't end up getting a lot of chalk dust on your shoes and your trousers and stuff, but I like chalk. And you always had little bits of chalk in your jacket pocket. That was being a proper teacher. I would say within about 5 years, all of a sudden I was being presented with whiteboards and the marker pens and interactive whiteboards with an RGB thing. And I didn't like the pens. I don't like the smell of the solvent. But yeah, I can't put an exact year on it, but I would suggest that within 5 years of Labour taking power, interactive whiteboards were basically common. Not everywhere. I would go into the odd class where there wouldn't be one, but they were starting to come in. And by the time Labour had finished in power, they were everywhere. Everywhere. Only mathematicians like chalkboards. Well, although over the course of my career, I actually split my time. No, it's mostly science, but I did do a lot of maths teaching as well. Oh, I loved it for science as well. Really good for science. You can do nice diagrams, coloured chalk and everything. Now, granted, with the RGB projector, you can find an image in advance and you can make your PowerPoint presentation. That's good. That's grand. But I like the chalk. But never mind. It's all gone now. Remember the press in 92 with its nightmare on Kinnock Street scenario? Well, okay, yeah, there was an awful lot of media attacks on Neil Kinnock, sure. But I mean, that is the lot of being a Labour leader. You have to put up with that, really. A lot of chalk in my lungs. I don't think it would have been as bad as the solvent from the marker pens in my lungs, would it? I mean, they're saying the Tory papers had massive influence. I mean, they always do. They always do. Chalk was more throwable at pupils. No, I've never thrown anything at a pupil. No, you don't throw things at people. Whiteboards are naff. Use chalkboards at uni so much better. Yeah. Do you know what? We had when I was at university, we had a statistics teacher in my first year. We actually had it's actually quite funny because we had the lectures in the chemistry department for that one because of obviously scheduling. But I had not clocked this. I just thought all the lectures were in like the main physics lecture theatre, the Rutherford lecture theatre. So there I went, just looking at my timetable, but not the where it was supposed to be. And I'm sat there in this lecture theatre, and we're doing electromagnetism, and I thought it was statistics. And I, about 10 minutes in, realised I was in a second year lecture. But I was right in the middle of it all. There was no way of getting out without causing a scene. So I just stayed there and missed the first one. But anyway, so from the second week, I was in the right place. And it was brilliant, this lecture theatre in the chemistry department, because it had all these boards on rollers. Although I say it was brilliant, it was not easy to follow, because this Dr. Leahy was called, who was doing the statistics, writing frantically on the board, and then he'd fling it to some far corner and grab another one and write it. It was a spectacular mechanism. He could just pull all these boards down and then chuck them up somewhere. But it did make it hard to follow what he was doing. Acetate and projectors were the go-to. The only benefit, the only thing I missed about projectors is you could use them for quite a lot of physics experiments, because a very bright light source, diffraction and holography and stuff. But by and large, no, the RGB projectors are better. Anyway, should we go back onto politics, because you're distracting me again. Have I missed the update on my Labour selection? The last I heard, I was still waiting for the closing date imminent. Okay. No, there hasn't been an update. So what happened was an email went out, and the deadline was Thursday, so the deadline has now passed. It's in. But they did say they'd be following up with an email about how the selection process will work. I've not had that. So I will just wait and see. So as I understand, and I don't know what the process changes all the time anyway, and I've never actually been involved in the process ever, not as a candidate, but ever, because I've never lived in a place that was selecting a new candidate for Labour. So I've always moved before the MP. So I've always had like a stable either candidate or MP. So yeah, I've never actually been involved in any capacity in selecting a Labour MP. Not that it would matter, experience would make no difference because the system has changed. So I've got no idea how it's going to work. All I know is the deadline has passed, so I'm now in the vetting process, so they'll be vetting me and looking me up on social media and going, oh my God, no, I'm sorry, you haven't quite made the cut. Or you have made the cuts, now on to the next bit. I don't know. And I may not expect to hear for some time. I don't know how many people will have applied. The other thing is the vetting takes place regionally, so there may be numerous, in fact there are numerous constituencies selecting, so they've got probably a lot of people to vet. I may not find anything out for 2 months. I don't know. I will just wait. Why is it that people who advocate for corporal punishment in school never also advocate for corporate punishment in the workplace? Very good. Right, we're going to move away from the teaching ones because you're going to suck me in otherwise. If you become the candidate, I'll happily drive over the day to canvass on your behalf. That's very nice of you. But there we go. If selected, would I have to temper my thoughts at all? Well, not my thoughts, but obviously, I've said it enough times on my channel. You know, Labour members, that's one thing. You absolutely express your views. I would still say Labour members should still think. Well, actually, no. I'm going to say anyone should think carefully about what they say. But as a Labour candidate, make Brexit work. So inevitably, so I'm obviously not going to stop doing videos on the channel. And I'm not going to suddenly start saying things that are different to what I believe. So it might just be there are certain things I don't do at all, which won't obviously be Brexit. I'm still going to suggest. I don't think there's anything wrong, even as a Labour candidate, saying that we should, at some point, rejoin the EU. There are Labour backbenchers who say that. It clearly is not against the rules. But inevitably, as a candidate, I will be standing on a manifesto which is no single market, joining the EU or customs union in the first parliament. But then I already accept that we can't do that anyway. So although, yes, I will add an extra editorial filter to what I say, because I am not just speaking on my behalf, but representing Labour, I think my views are pretty in tune with Labour anyway, so I don't think I should really have to do much different. It may just be that every now and then I'm looking at a video script and I'm thinking, maybe I just don't do this one. But I already do that because there's always more things I want to talk about than I have time to talk about. I mean, recently it's been so mad. I've been doing 3 videos a day. You know, if selected, couldn't support tactical voting. Oh no, I can support tactical voting. Oh, sorry. I thought you meant proportional representation. Tactical voting. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, I can't. No. I had thought about that one. That is the biggie for me. It is the biggie. Maybe there are ways to hint at it. Maybe there are ways to hint at it. But you are right. I cannot say to someone, if I were a Labour candidate, I could not advise people in Somerton and Frome to vote Lib Dem. That is, you are correct. That is probably the biggest problem. Not problem. That is probably the biggest issue for me. If there's a cunning way to, I mean, well, okay, what if it was this way around? What if instead of me saying that, because what I would say at the moment is when a Conservative MP loses, Labour gains. And it doesn't matter who they lose to. Obviously, it's better when it's Labour, but mostly it will be to Labour. When a Conservative MPs lose, that is to Labour's benefit, because even though if you're replacing a Tory MP with a Lib Dem MP, they're both on the opposition benches, that Tory party is now smaller and they've got a bigger job to rebuild. So it's in Labour's interests. But you are right. I can't turn around and say, well, look, Labour have got no chance there, so, you know. But what I can do, I suspect, is report. I could say, for example, some people are choosing, oh, we might find that in the next election, more people than usual choose to vote tactically using a website such as blah, blah, blah. There might be like cunning ways I can get around it. But yeah, it could be something that is more of a problem. But don't worry, I shall tell you who to follow, who will definitely openly say, vote tactically. Let's make Brexit work by rejoining the EU. So, well, I've already done my mental gymnastics on this. Making Brexit work means, so what is Brexit? Brexit is like Britain outside the EU. Make Britain outside the EU work by just making things work. By saying, right, we need to boost productivity. How do we do that? Oh, we need more workers? Okay, we'll train more workers. In the meantime, let's, you know, make sure that visas are available where that labour is not available in this country. Okay, we need to boost our exports to the EU, so we need to work on deals with the EU, move close to the EU. All of these things are things that Labour is saying anyway. There's no real problem with this. No real problem at all. Make Brexit work is one of those beautiful political slogans that can mean so many things to so many people. Perfect. It just means so many things to so many people. Lovely 3-word political slogan. Saying Prigozhin looks to have cooked himself. What was the point then? Do you know what? I've no idea. I do not. Given that a coup began, and Putin fled Moscow, I gather. He buggered off to St. Petersburg. A load of his oligarchs buggered off out the country. So I don't see how either Putin or Wagner come out of this with much credibility. It all looks very weird. All looks incredibly weird. But I'll have to. I've already been noting down a lot of things this afternoon when I got back. I'll have to see what emerges overnight and see if I can say something sensible in a video tomorrow, I think. How can you judge legally if someone is tactically voting and then punish them for it? Well, it's no, you can't. No. Right. In terms of party rules, you are not supposed to campaign for anyone other than a Labour candidate if there is a Labour candidate standing, which there will be. So that's the Labour Party rules. You cannot advocate for it. But as a candidate, you know, there's extra rules as a candidate. You don't promote another party, even if it is ultimately to the good of your party because of our weird first past the post system. Don't worry, I shall get around it. There'll be no. Again, as I say, I'll just make everyone will know. Everyone on this channel will know about tactical voting. It will be that simple. But it's not how you've, obviously no one knows how you vote, but if, for example, and this is where Alistair Campbell was treated quite badly. So he was kicked out of Labour for saying he'd voted for the Lib Dems in the last European elections in this country, even though Jeremy Corbyn had basically said there's no point in voting Labour. But he didn't break the party rules. If he'd have said ahead of time that he was voting Lib Dem, that would break party rules. But because he said it afterwards, he can't influence people. The vote has already taken place. So after the polls have closed, if you say it, all right, people might not like it, but it's not against the party rules. Would I consider being Labour leader? No. Immediately, no. Never. I wouldn't even, in all likelihood, consider, like, for the sake of it, ministerial positions. It would have to be one, and there'd be so many Labour MPs, there'll be nothing anyway, and I'll be a brand new one. I think it's much more important. See, the seat, if I did become the candidate, Doncaster East is going to be a marginal constituency. They've basically turned a bit of Doncaster into a marginal by tacking Tory Town onto it, which is where I live. So although Labour should win it at the next election, after that, it will be tougher. It's going to be a marginal constituency. It's not going to be a constituency where a Labour MP can get elected. It's not like, if it had stayed as it is, if the boundaries stayed as they are, Don Valley, which is what it's made up of, flipped Tory in 2019. That would have reverted back, and then the Labour MP would have been set for decades, probably. Certainly many years. That is not the case now with Doncaster East. If they're not really on it, if they're not providing value to the local constituency, whoever is selected as the candidate will win next year or whenever the election is. Then it'll be harder. It will be harder, and it will get harder as time goes on, unless they are really focusing on their constituency. And that is harder to do with a ministerial position. What's my take on Labour's plan to stuff the Lords with Labour peers? Can Starmer suddenly appoint them to get his legislation through? Does that also mean the Lords will vote to abolish themselves? So it is actually common practice when a new party takes over to do that. What happens is Tories come into power, and you end up with a disproportionate number of Tory peers entering the chamber, which means that then the Tories end up with more Lords than Labour. Then Labour come to power, they do the same thing, and it just seesaws like that. So what's happening is no different. It's not unprecedented. In fact, it's very precedented. It happens all the time. And yes, it will make it easier to get the legislation through, which is the main reason why you do it. And you don't want the Lords slowing things down, unless it is to raise sensible objections. And they can do that no matter what the balance is in there. And then, yes, vote to... Well, even if they don't vote to abolish themselves, you just force it through the following year with the Parliament Act. That's actually not a big deal. When it comes time to abolish the House of Lords, it won't really matter whether the Lords go along with it or not, because you'll just force it through. Would I fancy taking on David Davis in my constituency? Would I think it was worth a go against that thick as mince David? Well, if I did win the candidacy for Doncaster East, I'll be up against Nick Fletcher unless he announces he's standing down. I think at the moment he's going to fight it. So I'll be up against Nick Fletcher. I shall enjoy that because I have two advantages over Nick Fletcher. First, he's an idiot. Second, have you heard Nick Fletcher talk? Did anyone hear him making his pointless statement in the debate about Boris Johnson's suspension? His voice is truly awful. I don't like to pick on people because of their voice, but it puts you to sleep. You can't follow what he says because you're just going into a coma when you listen to him. So I shall enjoy going up against him at the hustings. I should really say that I would enjoy going up against a worthy opponent. But this is politics. You need to win by hook or by crook. For Education Secretary. Again, the other thing to bear in mind is this, okay? So absolutely, I am going to prioritise as a Labour candidate and a Labour MP, Labour winning. I've said it enough times on my channel. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is, and I have one, if you're not in power, none of it happens. You know, you give me a choice between a leader who agrees with me on all policies and another one who only agrees with me on a quarter of them, but the one who agrees on a quarter will win the election and the other one will not. I'll vote for the quarter, because a quarter is better than nothing. Because the leader who agrees with me on everything is offering me nothing. And the same will apply. I will obviously always act to make sure that Labour are going to win the next election. But I do have a couple of views which would have to be toned down if I ever, because there's an extra responsibility, there's ministerial responsibility. And ministerial responsibility does not necessarily lend itself to my particular Brexit views. Or indeed, maybe, I don't know about proportional representation. I think you are actually, because Labour don't have a position on proportional representation officially, I think you are actually allowed to say what you think. I think. But on Brexit, let us be honest. Say Phil is a pragmatist who leans left. No, I am actually very, very far to the left. Honest, I don't know how many times I have to talk about what I would do with housing and the NHS and education and so on. I am very much to the left. There is no public service that I would not want to see 100% nationalised. Not a single one. There's even some things that we don't necessarily think of as public services that I think in an ideal world would be nationalised. I think farming in an ideal world would be nationalised. I even think if I was building a country from scratch, I would even have state-owned supermarkets. For the basics, I'm not killing off entrepreneurship at all. I'm not a communist, but I would make sure, if it was up to me, that the state provided everything that people needed affordably. And the private sector can be the cherry on top. The private sector can add the luxuries, right? So I am actually very far to the left, but I will work with people who are much closer to the centre, because that's where voters are. So I will support policies around the centre, not because I think they're the best thing for the country, but because I recognise that they're the only way to win. Late arriving. Have I been selected as a Labour candidate for Doncaster East? No. I strongly suspect I won't be, but if I am, I don't know when it will be. It would be months away, probably. Although they may have to rush just in case there's like an October or November election, but still. What do I think of the Tories recently plumbing the depths to criticise a teenage ice cream salesman working on the French Riviera? Yes, so for those who don't know, it's come out that Keir Starmer got into a bit of trouble with the French police because, like, you know, a young lad at the time, you know, went travelling and he heard that you could make money selling ice creams and you couldn't. It was against the law. He didn't know. He wasn't a lawyer at the time. And he's not a French lawyer now. So, yeah, he got busted. Apparently he wasn't arrested, though. His mate was arrested, but he wasn't. He just had his ice creams confiscated. So it sounded like the gendarme had a lot of free ice creams. So, yeah, in all honesty, I don't think even the Daily Mail are making much of this. I think even they recognise there's nothing in this. Phil gets selected. I'm selling my Tesco shares. Bear in mind, I am well aware that 80% of what I would think is best for the country can never happen because there's too few people in the country that would vote for it. So I'm aware of that. My partner has a saying, she will support any step to the left. Now, I am a bit more ambitious than that, but what I also would say is if you can move things to the left a bit, and then a bit further, and you can incrementally show people the benefits, then you can also pull the people to the left. But the only way to do it is to keep winning elections. Do I think that the furlough scheme showed how people, when freed from pressure work, mainly sought to better themselves and pursue new hobbies and interests? Good argument for UBI. In many ways, yes. And I'll tell you what you also found is you found a lot of people who were not furloughed, but working from home, working more productively from home. Obviously, clerical workers. Like you get Tories who go, oh, I'd like to see a bus driver working from home. Well, you sort of could. You could have them drive it remotely, I suppose. But no, we're not talking about that, you idiot. But clerical workers, of course, can work from home, and they work more productively. You know, what happens is you don't have to travel, so you're at your desk early. Well, you might as well get started. Or at the end of it, I'm telling you, clerical workers mostly will clock off at 5 if that's their ending time in the office. But at home, well, might as well just finish this. My partner's sometimes working till 5 or 6 o'clock. And the workplace isn't paying her piss in electricity. They're getting free electricity and extra hours of work. It's an absolute bargain. Absolute bargain. So the Conservatives are going to attack Keir for being a capitalist. Well, it's quite funny, isn't it? So you've got, the narrative is that like Keir Starmer's right wing and Rishi Sunak's left wing. Oh, politics is insane sometimes. Honestly, I have to, I really enjoy it, and I very rarely have to do this, but sometimes I just have to step away when it just gets a little too crazy. Will Labour go against the British state and super rich to close tax loopholes, change inheritance tax loopholes and tax the wealthy heavily? So I'll tell you what's interesting. Obviously, we know they're keen on removing quite a few tax breaks. We also know it's not easy because if someone is earning earnings a strong word, but if someone's earning so much money that they would be liable for millions in tax, it's worth paying 100,000 to a very clever accountant to work out a way of not paying it, right? So you bring in a system, they'll find another way, okay? But I'll tell you what's interesting, and there's a real international push at the moment to introduce, imagine this rule, right? Imagine this. So Jacob Rees-Mogg pays not a penny of tax in Britain on his investments, because it's all in the Cayman Islands, right? So let's say you introduce a rule that says if you're based in Britain, you're going to pay the British rate of tax. If you put your money in a tax haven, you can pay it to that tax haven or you can pay it to Britain. So in other words, Jacob Rees-Mogg moves his investments to the Cayman Islands, or the office to the Cayman Islands. He will have to pay the same amount of tax as he would in Britain to the Cayman Islands. Now, it could well be that those tax havens either apply the tax or they don't, but this rule proposal, and this isn't Labour rule proposal, this is international, and it's getting quite a lot of interest, even from countries like Singapore, right? The proposal is that you are going to pay tax on it. There's no way of moving it somewhere to not pay tax. If the tax haven doesn't charge you the tax, then your host country will. But you are paying it. And what that'll mean is, what's the point of setting yourself up an office or a post box in the Cayman Islands? Because you're not going to get out of tax. So there are certainly things that are happening internationally that the Conservatives would object to and resist, but Labour would not necessarily. And then, of course, we also know, say Starmer's not left-wing centrist at best. Again, anyone who has seen what Starmer has done in his life, that is an absolute nonsense position. An absolute nonsense position. His government won't be, but that's because you can't win with a very left-wing government. People in this country are centre-left, but they're still subject to a very right-wing media, so they're confused. But you cannot win, with a very left-wing government. Or if you did, if by some fluke, and I know we nearly got it, okay, he'd have been straight out. Corbyn would have been, if he'd have won in 2017, he'd have been out on his arse the very next election, and Labour would have been in the doldrums for a very long time. And they knew what they were doing as well. Corbyn and McDonnell were making plans for what to do in the event of a run on the bank. They were actually planning on crashing the economy deliberately. They were actually going to be Liz Truss before Liz Truss was Liz Truss. Labour would have been out for God knows how long. We'd have had like a few years and everyone would have gone crazy. And then the Tories would now still be in and set for another 20 years. The only people that pay tax are working people. Often seems that way, doesn't it? Often seems that way. Yes. Anyway, so we'll come to the end. Let's try and pick on another few. Ask Rishi the price of milk. He'll tell you his 5 pledges, and Rishi what the weather is like. He'll tell you his 5 pledges. He's working for British people, like talking to a robot. It is. Well, I've said it's like getting a parrot. We could just buy a parrot. It'd be cheaper. All you need to do is feed them a few peanuts. I gather they like crackers. They don't arrange budgets to suit their wife. It'd be brilliant. Did I see Morgan on GB News being savaged by 2 Brexiteer businessmen and economists? It was fun. No, I don't really watch GB News in all honesty. What level of capitalism and entrepreneurship would I accept in my ideal society? So in my ideal society, it's really this simple. People need certain things. Okay? So they need universal, free at point of access healthcare. They need housing. So my housing policy would be the government build houses. You have the housing department doesn't just legislate, it builds the bloody houses. When you come of age and you enter the workplace, the government says, here's your house. And you pay it off according to, well, there's a range of houses depending on your earnings. Again, I'm not talking about communism. Not everyone earns the same. You've still got, according to your skills and how scarce those skills are. But, you get a suitable home, and it's like getting a mortgage off the government. You just pay it off at a certain rate in line with your income. And if at a certain point and there'll still be a private housing market, there'll still be people who want a nicer house. I wouldn't ban that. And also, if you pay your government mortgage off, you own your house. So then you've got a private house. But there will always be a house for people. As long as they're willing to work, the government will give you a house. They will ask you to pay back at a rate that is affordable for your income. If you lose your job and you're out of work for a bit, then you don't pay anything. Still your house. And if you don't pay it off by the time you snuff it, then the state just takes the house back and gives it to someone else. And if you do and you own it, then you can just pass it to a relative in your will or something. Water, energy, again, all of these should be, should be no privatisation in those. The transport, buses, trains, planes I'm less sure about. I haven't really thought enough detail. But trains and buses, there's no real need to have a private version of those at all. Taxis, I'd be okay with that. I'd accept that. I'd be all right with that. But if your buses and trains are good enough, and that doesn't just mean that there are buses and trains, I mean that there are routes and that they're regular enough. So, and food, the easiest way to make sure food, there will be some privatisation food because we have to import some food, yeah? So we can't actually produce enough food. Well, we can to feed ourselves, but not in terms of what people would expect of a rich country. So we're going to have to import some. And again, there's no issue with having farmers, private farmers who sell their stuff like for more money to people who want, but everyone will have access to the staples of food. And I don't mean cabbage soup. Again, we're not talking about Soviet Russia. That's what I would say. Everything that people need, the state should provide. As long as you're willing to work at whatever you can do, the state should provide. It should make sure that you earn enough to be able to afford what is considered a basic standard of living. But there we go. Right, we'll have to call it there though, because we've gone over. But thanks very much for coming on, everyone. I'll go back to watching Russia do whatever Russia does. Have a good evening, everyone. Until next time, I'll see you later.